Right now, in thousands of commercial trucks all across the country, there's a new technology that's always on, always watching. Now, it's supposed to make things safer by tracking driver attention, but it does this using a force you literally cannot see. So that's what we're digging into today. What happens when that invisible watcher might be causing a very visible, very real problem?
So, for hundreds of these drivers, the story doesn't start with some new safety feature. It starts with something much more personal. This strange, nagging irritation. Itchy, dry, painful eyes. A feeling of strain that just wasn't there before. And get this, a survey of over 120 drivers using these new systems, well, it paints this really consistent and, frankly, alarming picture of discomfort.
Okay, so just how big a deal is this? To really get a handle on the scale of it, we've got to look at what the drivers themselves are saying. And let's be clear, this isn't just one or two people complaining. We're talking about a real pattern of symptoms here, one that points to something much bigger going on.
Okay, look at these numbers. This is where it gets pretty wild. A whopping 82.6% of the drivers we're talking about reported eye irritation. Nearly 3/4 felt their eyes were just tired all the time, and over 63% were dealing with actual pain or headaches, some describing it as a stabbing feeling. These aren't just vague complaints. They are specific, they are widespread, and they all kicked off after this new piece of tech was put in their trucks.
All right, so what is this thing? What's this invisible force that seems to pop up at the exact same time all these symptoms start? It's time to pull back the curtain and identify the potential culprit.
Okay, so here's the tech at the center of it all. It's called an active infrared detection system. Basically, the device is constantly blasting the driver's face with near-infrared light. You can't see it, you can't feel it, but it lets an AI camera see you perfectly, 24/7, even in pitch-black darkness. It's like night vision, but for a computer that's watching to see if you're drowsy or distracted.
Now, this is the really crucial part, what makes this whole situation so tricky. Think about it. When a bright light hits your eyes, you flinch, right? You squint, you blink, you turn away. That's called the aversion response. It's your body's built-in alarm system. But with this near-infrared light, that alarm never goes off. Your eyes can be soaking in this radiation for hours and hours, and your body has no idea it needs to defend itself.
So that brings up a huge question, right? Just because we can't feel it, does that automatically mean it's safe? Well, let's see what the science has to say about that. Because the research on what infrared radiation does to our bodies, well, it tells a very different story.
Get ready for this number. It is a big one. Scientific studies show that up to 96% of this near-infrared light doesn't just hit your eye. It punches right through the outer layers, the cornea and the lens, and gets beamed, focused directly onto your retina, the most delicate, light-sensitive tissue in your entire body. And look, this isn't some what-if scenario. The science on this is not new. For decades, medical literature has documented the very real dangers of being exposed to infrared for long periods. We're talking about actual thermal damage to the cornea, a higher risk of cataracts, and even burns on the retina itself. These are serious, potentially permanent conditions.
So you can imagine when drivers and their unions started raising these issues, what was the official response? Well, they pointed to international safety standards. The companies basically said, don't worry, the devices are compliant, they're safe. But that's where the story gets really interesting.
In fact, in a formal letter to OSHA, the company, UPS, admitted that these devices fall into a low-risk category, Risk Group 1. They said there's minimal risk under normal circumstances. And on the surface, that sounds pretty good, right? Minimal risk.
But here's the thing. You always have to ask whenever someone says something meets a standard, what does that standard actually say? What's in the fine print? What are the conditions? And more importantly, what are the exceptions? Boom. There it is, right there in the fine print of the official safety standard, IEC 62471. It says, clear as day, that these safety limits, they just plain do not apply to abnormally photosensitive individuals. In other words, the very rulebook they're using to say the device is safe has a giant asterisk, and it seems to be getting ignored. There's a clear lack of accountability here.
So you're probably thinking, photosensitive individuals, that must be some super rare condition, right? Wrong. This isn't some tiny group of people. We're talking about folks with certain genetic issues, sure, but also people with common eye or neurological disorders. And, the big one, people taking incredibly common medications.
I mean, just take a look at some of these. We're not talking about obscure drugs here. These are everyday antibiotics, antidepressants, diuretics, heart medications. Millions and millions of people take these. And according to the safety standard itself, that whole low-risk label might not mean a thing for them. They could be way more vulnerable.
So all of this brings us to the final, and honestly, the most important part of this whole story. The fundamental right to a safe workplace and the massive, dangerously unanswered questions that are still hanging in the air.
You know, there's a reason we have OSHA, the Hazard Communication Standard. It's literally called the Right to Know Standard. It means employers have a legal responsibility to tell their employees about hazards on the job. So if a piece of technology could be a hazard, even for a specific group of people, and you don't tell them, that's not just an oversight, it's a potential violation of federal law. Which leads to some really big, unanswered questions. First up, where are the human studies? With thousands of drivers exposed, you'd think there would be some long-term studies on this specific device. So far, nothing's been made public.
And another thing, who's the referee here? A standard on paper is useless without enforcement. Who is actually making sure these guidelines are followed, especially with that giant exception for photosensitive people we just saw?
And this one just blows my mind. If the safety standard itself says, hey, watch out for this group of people, why isn't anyone being told about it? Why aren't drivers being informed that their everyday heart medication could be putting them at a higher risk from the equipment in their own cab?
So, at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one final thought. A driver could spend 60, maybe 70 hours a week, week after week, for their entire career staring into this thing. With that kind of constant, career-long occupational exposure, there is truly no telling what kind of irreparable harm is being done. With so many driver complaints and so many documented risks, the biggest question of all is, who's going to step up and find the answers before it's too late?